What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the Driving Tone podcast. This is where I answer one of your questions from the comment section while I'm driving somewhere. So if you have a question that you want us to deep dive into, put it in the comment section of this video. I'll come back and check it, and I might pick one to use for the next video. Like and subscribe if you like guitar stuff, because that's what we do on this channel. We got all kinds of other videos that aren't driving in the car, but this is just kind of nerding out and deep diving on various stuff that you might want to know about. So let's do it. I should tell you where we're driving. Usually we're just running an errand, going to the post office or something, but right now I'm actually in my Class B motorhome, and I am on I-75, about an hour south of the Mackinac Bridge-ish, something like that, in Michigan. So, let's talk about today's question. Today's question comes from a viewer in last week's video who wants to know, how do you make pickups muddy versus making them clear, like clarity? What makes that difference? There's a couple things that, what we should say is, every little thing in the construction of a pickup makes some difference, and a lot of them are cumulative, and each aspect sort of pushes and pulls on the other, right? So you can't just change one thing and then say, well, that's going to get me the result, because that also might affect two or three other things. So when you look at a pickup, a lot of people will make the mistake of asking this question and expecting an answer that is, well, if I get a pickup that is this, it's automatically going to have more clarity than that. It's not how it works, because everything is pushing and pulling on each other when you make adjustments. The end result is a result of the design and the picking each of the specs of the pickup that ends up in an end result. Okay? So you can't just say, well, this wire is going to be more clear than that wire. This magnet is going to be more clear than that magnet. This line count is going to be more clear than that, or muddier than that. You can't say that, because it sort of all works together. But I'll give you some general ideas here on things that really matter, okay? Magnet quality and wire quality are huge. You have less control over them a lot of times, unless you do like super tight A/B testing. You make a pickup that is exactly the same spec, except you change the magnet, right? And I don't mean the magnet type, I mean the magnet quality. An Alnico 5 magnet from one magnet factory in China can sound different than another magnet factory in China. And you might say, well, why don't you just get them from the United States? You can't. There are no magnets for guitar pickups made in the United States. So, at least commercially available. So that means that if anybody says, I'm making my pickups from 100% United States source stuff, they're not telling you the truth. So, it all comes from China, so you have to kind of go through them all. You sort of have to like decide which, and put that aspect into your design of your pickup and make sure that you get the result you want. Same thing with wire. Basically, all that wire comes from China in one way or another. It's branded different things once it gets to the United States, but the bottom line is most of it comes from over there. So you kind of have to decide which brand of wire you're going to use, and then sort of design around that. Now, the things you can control a lot more are things like wire gauge. So, the thinner the wire, the higher resistance per foot. The thicker the wire, the lower resistance per foot. And this is just the wire itself, copper stranded. So if you put 8,000 winds of 42 on a Strat pickup, and you put 8,000 winds of 43 on a Strat pickup, the resistance is going to be higher, even though the wind count is going to be the same on the 43 gauge wire, and you're going to have less clarity, because the higher resistance is going to shave some highs, it's going to cut some mids, and you're going to have less clarity. Does that make it a bad pickup? No, but it just means that because you change that spec, the thickness of the wire, it changes everything. This is also why pickup resistance is a terrible metric to gauge the sound of a pickup by, because you can't always know that. You can't always know what that means about a pickup. So, the thickness of the wire, 42, 43, 44, those are the top three that people use. The thickness of the insulation on the wire. Have you ever heard heavy form var wire versus plain enamel wire? Those are old-fashioned terms that mean a lot less these days. Today you'll hear single build poly and double build poly, which gives you the same result because technology has changed. The coating type of the wire matters a lot less than the thickness of it. So double build poly is going to have like a 0.00027 versus a 0.00024 or something thickness. It's like really, really, really tiny thickness difference. But what that does on the pickup is it, if you think about it this way, if you have thicker insulation on wire, when you wrap it around something, the coil size will be bigger if the insulation is thicker, which changes the sound of the pickup. It also means that the wires aren't close together. The thicker the insulation is, the core of the wire is actually further apart. So that also changes the sound. So further apart, thicker insulation, sometimes, depending on these other factors that we talked about, because everything pushes and pulls, you can get more clarity out of that. The wire tension when you wind the pickup. So if it's really tight, you can actually change the inductance of the pickup by the tension of the wire. And we're talking grams here. So I have a winder that I have at home that we use that can measure how many grams of tension. If you wire something 10 more grams tension, the sound of the pickup changes and you lose clarity. It's like that finite. 10 grams. 10 grams is hard to feel in your hand. I can feel it because I've done like thousands of them. But pull something 10 grams less or more, very, very difficult to tell the difference unless you know what you're feeling. But it makes a big difference. That can change the clarity or the muddiness of a pickup. How neatly the wire is laid onto it can also make a big difference. So if you put wires completely straight next to each other, then what will happen is you'll get what's called capacitive loss across those wires. If they're a little messier, you'll get less capacitive loss. Capacitive loss causes loss of highs. So tension and the neatness of the coil, I call it the bagginess of the coil, like you can make a coil real baggy and loose. The trade-off is, if you make it too loose, it hurts the inductance of the pickup, which also affects the tone of the pickup. So these are all trade-offs. They all push and pull on each other. It's very interesting. Well, you might not think it's interesting, but it's what I do for a living, so I nerd out about this stuff a lot. Let's see. Those are probably the biggest things. You know, of course, we could talk about magnet type, like Alnico 5, 3, 2, 8, ceramic. But the problem is, hey buddy, that's a good way to lay down. But the problem is you don't just change magnet type. You make a bunch of other changes to compensate for various things to get to an end result, like I said. So as much as people want to say, well, if I change this, it's going to make this pickup sound a certain way, it's not usually the case. Usually it's an engineering decision that takes a whole bunch of things into play, and you make adjustments. So you can make tension adjustments, you can make winds per layer adjustments. So when you're winding a pickup and you're going back and forth like this, you can say I want, 200 winds per layer before I come back the other way, or do I want 150? Makes a difference. Do I want 25 grams, or do I want 35 grams of tension? Which is not real numbers. I don't say those numbers out loud on the internet. But we set those. We make sure that those are right. Magnet strength obviously can be a thing, but people lean on it way too hard. Alnico 5 pickups have this characteristic, and Alnico 2 pickups have this characteristic. Okay, if all you're doing is changing one thing, but most of the time that's not the case. What I mean by that is, okay, I'll give you an example. You can take a humbucker, and you can use 43 gauge wire, and you can use an Alnico 5 magnet, and you can wind it to 8K, okay? Or you can use 42 gauge wire, and you can wind it to 8K, and use the same magnet. The pickup will sound completely different. You could change just the magnet, and the pickup will sound completely different. But most of the time, you're doing more than one thing. There's more than one way. There's probably 4 or 5 different ways to get an 8K humbucker with a particular magnet strength. There's a bunch of different ways to get there. Different wire gauges, different wire insulation thicknesses. There's all kinds of magnet strengths. There's all kinds of different ways to get to the same numbers, but the pickup will sound different. So don't lean on that too hard. It's pretty interesting. It's neat stuff. So there you go. There's a little bit of nerdiness about muddy versus clarity. So that actual question that was asked, that's a bunch of nerdy stuff. But to answer the actual question, a lot of folks want to know why are pickups muddy? Because a lot of times, real inexpensive pickups are muddy. Here's why. They use cheap magnets and they use cheap wire. And then what happens is they have to wind the pickup not to get a sound for the sake of getting a sound. There's a difference between engineering a pickup from scratch and then using the materials you've been given because they cost a certain amount to get a certain result and have to make compensations in the design and compromises in the design to get generally in the area where you want, if that makes sense. If I can design a pickup completely from scratch, and it doesn't matter how much it costs, because it's just what it is when it's done. But when you have a $500 guitar or a $300 guitar, what typically happens is, for example, Squires, for example, Fender says, okay, factory in Indonesia or China, I want this Fender Squire to cost $500 or $600. And this is what I want it to look like, and I want it to have vintage-ish spec pickups. Okay. They don't care how they get there. They just want to get there. They want to get the general idea of the guitar, the general style of the guitar, the general tone of the guitar for this amount of money. The materials that go into it don't really matter. That's why you'll see a lot of import guitars, and they'll all be made out of all kinds of different stuff. They'll be made out of all kinds of different magnet strengths and all kinds of stuff for the pickups because they're trying to hit a price point. Because of that, the finer points of the tone of those pickups oftentimes have compromises to them. And the very first thing that goes is high frequencies and mid-high frequencies because it's the most difficult to get right with a cost limit. You need more expensive wire, you need more expensive magnets, and you need more time in the design. Cheap guitars, you just don't have those things. So that's why those cheaper guitars end up being that way. And that's what we fix most of the time here at DylanTalksTone. So there you go. This has been fun. Do me a favor. If you have a question that you want to get super nerdy about, put it in the comments. I'll drive somewhere next week and I'll answer that question. Because I think we're going to be on the road this time next week too. More guitar related next week. Thanks for hanging out. like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.